people dying. And so it's my privilege and my honor to be here and to be discussing this topic and to be talking about choice, which is, that's really what natural burial is about at this point. It's about making sure that we have a choice, that we have options when we die and what we want to happen with our bodies. So it's me tonight, Nicola Finch, and I am no expert. I'm not in the funeral industry. This is simply my passion. I am trained as a death doula, but I don't work as a death doula. I'm very interested and passionate about the whole world of death caring and community death caring, of coming together with people we love and our communities, and looking after each other in the dying and death process and after death. And natural burial is the part of it that really caught me. And I would really like to see natural, and when I say natural, I'm talking green, conservation, the whole circle of being put into the earth naturally. I'd like to see natural burial grounds available for every community in British Columbia, and I don't think that's an outrageous request or desire. And, we're doing really well in British Columbia when you look at other provinces in Canada. But we have great tracts of the province that have no natural burial available. And so that's kind of what we're working on. And making it affordable, making it easy for people, making it something that we center around as community. And so tonight, we're talking about what we call the low-hanging fruit, which is the hybrid green burial in municipal or in conventional cemeteries, right? So hybrid green is where there's a small section or area of a cemetery that's devoted to green burial. And some of our municipal cemeteries in BC are implementing that, which is wonderful. It's sort of the first step, but it's a really good step to get communities aware of what green burial is, and to maybe encourage our municipalities when they expand or add a cemetery that they also include natural burial or make it a complete natural burial. But not everybody wants a natural burial, blah, blah, blah. Boy, there's so much to talk about. I get all excited and off in 50 different directions. Anyway, so hi, I'm Nicola. Emily is here tonight, Emily Bootle from Death Care BC, who is an expert, I consider. She is a funeral director and a recovering embalmer, I think she called herself at one point. In any case, she will also have the floor after a little while, but she's also here to assist me and back me up and snap me too if I make really dumb comments, because as I say, this is my passion, not my profession. So we're also going to hear from Trevor Crean tonight, who is just a delight. I haven't met him in person, but I've met him online quite a few times. And he's an interesting fellow. He and his family have been in the funeral industry in the cemetery for over 100 years, and you'll hear him talk about that a little bit. But he has a cemetery called Heritage Gardens in South Surrey, and he wasn't able to be here with us tonight, but we pre-recorded an interview with this evening's conversation in mind. So we'll hear from him as well, and then we'll hear from Emily after that. And we're thinking that Trevor's interview might bring up some questions and discussion too, because it's pretty interesting. So one of the things I want to start off with is a screen share. Hang on just a sec here. Does that come up? Look at that, eh? Is that up on your screen as well? Yeah. Okay. So this is the website, Natural Burial in BC, Green Burial BC, and there is a map here of all the locations that I'm currently aware of, and I think I've got them all. But then I hear from people and say, "Oh no, there's another one in such and such a community. So if anyone hears of, different places where green burial, natural burial, hybrid burial is available, it'd be really nice to add people onto this map. So you'll see that down south here is basically where most of the green and natural conservation burial is available in the lower part of the province, southern part of the province. And then there's a few that are up here. There's Fort St. John, there's Prince George, and there's Telqua. Lakeview Cemetery in Penticton is one I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight and show you some pictures. They are a hybrid green cemetery. Their cemetery has been around for a long, long time. I have ancestors buried there. The reason I've kind of chosen Lakeview is because it's my hometown from my teenage years anyway. And and they have a beautiful cemetery overlooking Okanagan Lake. And they have put in a hybrid green burial section off to one side. And it took them, gosh, I don't know, about 6 years, I think, from deciding that they were going to do that to actually having an interment of folks in their green burial section. So, and that's realistic. It takes a fair amount of planning. It shouldn't necessarily take that long, but it's understandable if it does. It's also cost, I think, for a municipality. Bylaws have to be rewritten. Land has to be kind of dedicated to natural burial. So what's happening here? So if you go to this website, you'll find this map of where, I'm not sure why. Oh, there we go. And then there's also a listing of all the cemeteries and the hybrid green cemeteries here that are available in the province. Again, the ones that I know of. So what I want to do here. Here we go. So I'm going to show some pictures of Penticton. Is that coming up? Paused. Why is my screen sharing paused? I wonder. Anybody can jump in if you're.
It may have just paused. If you switched tabs, it might have just paused for privacy. So if you resume it, it might.
There we go.
Yeah.
Great. So this is Penticton.
We're still seeing the list, so it's not quite there, but
okay.
I trust.
What did it? Oh, it came up in my photos. That's not helping anybody, is it?
Yeah. If you close the screen share entirely and then just open it up again and reselect, that might be the easiest way.
Thanks, Emily.
Yep.
No. Oh, dear Lord. So, you can talk to fill a void here if you want.
I think if you go, yeah, there you go. Yeah, they're up.
Am I up? I think my computer's slow too, so I apologize for that. I really need a new laptop. It's a little snappier. Did it come up? No. Yeah?
Yeah, we can see the folder view with all the different pictures. Yeah.
Somebody's being patient. I don't know. Okay, anyway. So Penticton Lakeview Cemetery. They do have this lovely little and it looks little here because I can't get it big for you. But just a sec, maybe I can. Oh dear, I felt so smart. I thought, oh, I know how to screen share now. I even said that to Emily, right? Apparently not, dude. Okay.
If you click the preview,
it's not.
It's probably, it's moving quickly enough. There, that's
okay. That's
pretty
better than nothing, right? Okay, so the beginning. And they put this lovely little rock fence, rockery in as a tribute to babies and unborn. And I think they may have borrowed that from Royal Oak in Victoria. I believe they've done something similar to that. Anyway, it's a lovely idea. And so anyone can add a stone to this rockery. So that was the beginning. They had just started to kind of plan where it was going to be. So it's not a very big area, and I don't know the actual size. But this was when they were putting in some planting areas. And I wasn't there at a very bright time of year, but you can see a little bit of how they started it. And then this is just from a few months ago, and it's a happening thing now. I don't know how many burials they've had there. I get the feeling not very many, but of course they're not marked. Right. That's just a quick little tour. And so they have this sign up, and there's where the names will be of the folks who are buried there. It's a nice small area, and they've done a sweet job with it off to the side there, and it does have a beautiful view over Okanagan Lake. With municipal cemeteries and green burial, they tend to charge a very similar rate to a conventional plot. And so you wouldn't pay an awful lot less for the actual burial plot. And there's also an opening and closing fee, but you're not paying for a grave liner. You're not buying a big fancy hardwood casket. And there's no headstone. There's no individual headstone. The names are on this communal stone, and that's very common for a green burial, particularly in a hybrid green burial situation. So there are some savings there. And I think Penticton's probably, I think it's about $4,000 with the plot and the opening and closing, but there will be other, there's other costs and other things that people want to do as well, as far as ceremony and making it beautiful and all that kind of thing, the ceremony. So, but that's a basic cost of kind of what a plot and opening and closing would cost you in Penticton. And that's really normal in municipal cemeteries. You're not going to, green burial is not about saving money. It's really about the environment. It's about doing what we can to minimize our impact on the earth. And so it's a choice, like cremation. It's a choice like a conventional burial. Yeah, and so that's Penticton. Oh, I've got it. Don't know. You're not going to be able to see these. No, you're not. Oh yeah, there's the green burial lot. There's the opening and closing costs, and then all the bylaws. And it's interesting, I think, for some municipal cemeteries, because you can pretty much copy paste bylaws. There's certainly some differences with each of our cities and towns and municipalities, but it is, there are enough municipalities, I think, in BC who have done this now that it should be fairly straightforward as far as changing the bylaws in a cemetery to allow for green burials. And here's Powell River, another little photo I snatched off the internet. This is a fairly new area too for their green burial. And so I imagine they'll be planting more trees, and you can see the forested area just behind. And so our municipal cemeteries are doing their best to include everyone's wishes. It's also, it's a matter of how much space a cemetery has, whether they're going to be expanding or starting a new cemetery sometime soon. So there's always lots of considerations, and it's about education too, of course. And that's where we come in as much as possible to help educate our communities on what natural and green burial is. Yeah. And we're going to launch into Trevor Crean's interview now. He's like I was saying, his family goes back generations, right? His dad wrote a book called It's Your Funeral. Thomas Crean, and it's a great book. Thomas and Trevor, who you'll hear tonight, and the whole family are really passionate about serving people, giving people what they need and want in their time of grief and as they're saying goodbye to the people they love. So let me see if I can get Trevor's interview up here. See, I've got it all ready to go. Um, no. Now, does that bigger one come in, or are you just seeing the small M?
Just seeing the small, what might work is if you stop the screen share and then you open it up all the way and basically get it ready to press play. And then when you click share screen, and you hit.
With us tonight, he has agreed to do a pre-recorded interview so that does that work? Because he's not available.
Yeah.
And so Trevor Crean is the director of Heritage Gardens, and I have huge admiration for what Heritage Gardens Cemetery is doing. They are a sustainable family-owned cemetery in South Surrey, and they keep bees and they garden and they offer so many options for families, from places where you can keep your loved ones' cremated remains to natural burial to conventional burial. And so we have Trevor here tonight to talk about Heritage Gardens and to help me address the issue of hybrid green burial in British Columbia. Hi, Trevor. Thanks.
Well, hi, Nicola. Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell us a bit about Heritage Gardens for those who are not familiar with your model, which I think is, I'd love to see it cloned all over BC.
So, much of what you're giving us credit for there in the intro happened not by accident, but inadvertently. Like, it was not our original business plan was to open a cemetery that would serve faith communities or serve families who wanted. For faith communities, cemetery space in Metro Vancouver has become very expensive, and a lot of the traditional, like Orthodox or Muslim communities, Jewish communities, they have not accepted cremation. In the Lower Mainland, our cremation rate is like just bumping around 90% of people who pass away. But those people whose faith does not allow cremation are getting priced out all over the place. They're driving out to Chilliwack, 2 hours away, for a traditional burial. And so our initial concept, I guess I should say my background is funeral service. My family's had a funeral home for 120 years here in Vancouver. And so we worked with a number of these communities. And so that gave us the initial idea, hey, maybe we can rezone some land and then offer a space that would allow the kind of little churchyard cemetery, the traditional model that keeps a community together. Maybe we can offer that to them and they'd appreciate it. And we had some interest in that. We talked to some of the churches, some of the groups that we were used to working with, and they said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to us. So when we first opened, it was at the end of like 5 years of rezoning and development and licensing. That was pretty strenuous because I'm a funeral director. I'm not a developer. I learned real fast. But we closed about 1,200.
We lost the sound when you muted, Nicola.
Momentum and excitement about a new eco-friendly family-owned cemetery out in South Surrey, and it turns out that it's pretty tough to get the community rah about anything funeral related. And so yeah, we had no sales, no awareness of what we're doing. We tried advertising the paper, but nobody had heard of us and nobody cared really. And so it got really quiet out here, and my brother was basically looking at me like, what do we do now? And I was like, I guess we start farming. And so our vegetable garden and beehives was a result of having 8 acres of property and no funerals and not knowing what else to do with ourselves. And so we just started growing veggies, and then we would take the food to the Surrey Food Bank and the Cloverdale Community Kitchen and to a couple seniors residences, and that was how we introduced ourselves to the metro. It's just like pounding the pavement, knocking on doors and saying, hey, I know this is obscure, but here's 30 pounds of carrots and potatoes and some honey, and we're a new eco-friendly cemetery in South Surrey. And the way it's kind of evolved, like people, I guess we have to admit we get off a little bit on how weird that sounds because like you should see some of the faces. Like when we walked in the door, we're like, hi, here you go. Oh wow, like, and it's organic. Oh my god, this is amazing. Who are you again? Yeah, we're at the cemetery out in South Surrey. And like, and so but it's like it's kind of now that it's a night and day difference between folks who have had a chance to visit here versus people who just hear that, yeah, this is from a cemetery veggie garden.
One of our mutual friends, Karen, has I've heard from her the honey that she gets in honor of her dad. And that's such a neat idea that you have that program going where, well, maybe you could explain it.
Sure. So I would say at least half of the memorialization and half of the initiatives that we have going here are a result of just walking the property and having conversations with families. And sometimes families have really cool ideas. Not always. There's also some pretty loony ideas out there, and we just like, sorry, not here. But so we had beehives, and like it's amazing the connection that people have. Like, you know, I had an uncle who kept bees, or my grandpa kept bees and like we had like 3 acres out in Langley when I was a little kid, and we found really quickly like people relate. Like as soon as they relate to something, like the whole experience with funeral and end of life planning or at need like ceremony planning, it's exhausting, it's intimidating because people are learning a set of language that they've never used before. Interment, and what am I getting when I buy cemetery property? Well, you get a right of interment. You don't own any land, and talking about care fund and maintenance and all these things that are just overwhelming. And so when you have these little things sprinkled throughout the property that bring comfort or familiarity, or they have like an emotional association to these things, it really goes a long way to making the family feel like this is a space that I can entrust my loved one to be here, and
they can come back to, and I think that's so important. And the idea you mentioned a few minutes ago about the little churchyard cemetery, and we've moved so far away from that, but I think there are a lot of people who yearn for that kind of community place where we can go back and where we take our family, have a picnic,
absolutely
remember our people. Yeah,
the Orthodox have 2 like feast days a year where they'll be out here for a big picnic, and it's like you see 300 people attend, and it's so special that yeah, I think that community is so important. I mean, people who go to church, for example, you worship, you volunteer, your kids go to Sunday school, they might have an elementary school, you're doing fundraisers together, and then it's such a sensitive time as the loss of one of your community members. The family is forced to shop around what's close to us versus what can we afford. And so the community becomes spread out just based on each family's individual means. So that's what we were trying to restore was, hey, your community can just have a dedicated space here where it's automatic. You don't have to take on all that headache. Like everybody prearranged, and now it's just one less thing to worry about. So but the beehive sponsorship, that's it basically, like we had 2 hives here for the first 2 seasons, and then I just started asking folks because like in the back of my mind has for a long time been, how can we make the funeral process kid friendly? And like families, like I saw in funeral service so many times families were torn about, can we invite our kids to a visitation? Can they attend an open casket? Or is the funeral going to be too sad? Or is it too scary? And all these things. And I would try and like coax them into basically considering like your children are sponging up everything about this process, learning from you, because it's totally new. And if you can just kind of be open and answer their questions and kind of communicate the best, like it depends on the age, of course, but communicate that, you know, you are saying goodbye to grandma, grandpa, whoever, and but it's not a big scary thing. This is part of life, and this is what we're doing now, and we show love and we tell stories and describing that. And so the having beehives and having gardens that sponsorship program became another way that the family can bring the kids to the cemetery and like look at grandpa's bees, or like, you know, hey, maybe we're going to see a deer this time. And it's not like that chore kind of that it can be to, okay, let's go buy flowers and we're going to visit a headstone only. I wanted to provide more of a setting that is kind of a park. It's comfortable. It doesn't feel like an obligation to bring, if you want to bring your kids out here.
Yeah, wonderful. Excellent. So, and then that's just lovely and good for you. So your green burial section, your natural burial. Do you call it green burial or natural burial?
I guess since I've been since we started that, I didn't realize that the Green Burial Garden would become the name of the Green Burial Garden when I registered it in the Green Burial Society. So you go to the Green Burial Society's website and they have like all these beautiful named places for their eco-friendly things. I was like, darn, I guess I filled out that registration kind of wrong, but we're new to all of this. So yeah, we have the Green Burial Garden here. And it's been, it's interesting. Like, I guess speaking to Green Burial itself, what we have experienced is sometimes a real disconnect between the values of Green Burial and the needs of grieving visitors. And that's the biggest bridge that we've tried to gap. And I could fill that in a little bit in terms of I would say the vast majority of our Green Burial lots are people who want Green Burial and they're choosing it for themselves or them and their spouse. And so they prearrange everything with us. And then they tell their kids or executors, they say, don't worry, we've done our funeral plan, we've done our cemetery plan. If anything happens, make a phone call, everything's sorted. They don't get into the specifics of green burial and how it's minimalist and we don't have a permanent headstone. And so when the arrangement goes at need and the person's passed away and we do this beautiful ceremony at the graveside, then 3 weeks later, the family calls us and says, okay, we're ready to talk about a headstone. And we're like, well, that's going to be a short conversation. and so what we found is families, especially in the first 1-2 years following a loss, families, their grief it's so personal. It is different for everybody, but they need to visit the exact place, like their loved one's resting place. It doesn't really meet their emotional needs to be directed to a general area where their loved one is. And so we have these temporary markers that is just a nameplate that the idea is that we use them for any burial or cremation interment where that kind of, it marks your loved one's space for up to a year, giving the family time to arrange a headstone or something. Right. But in Green Burial Garden, where you can't have a headstone, we use these wooden kind of driftwood sculptures that we make, and we attach a nameplate, a bronze nameplate. So each of these monument things will kind of acknowledge about 12 to 18 people laid to rest in that area. But families we've gotten like a number of like stressed out, or I don't want to say nasty, but frustrated phone calls or emails when we've removed the temporary plaque a year or 2 years after the burial, because people come and they're like, where's my mom? Where's my dad? And we're like, you guys, like, this is a Green Burial Garden. Like we can't, like, the idea is that we're going to be bringing the forest up onto the property. Like we're actually, this spring, we're going to initiate our replanting plan. And so we had about, I think it was fall 2019, I believe we got the Green Burial certification. And so the intent is that, like, we've been conducting all of our burials from the east end of the garden, making our way west. We choose the next available space as a person passes.
How big is the area, Trevor?
223 graves were surveyed there.
Yeah.
So how big it is, it's probably about a third of an acre. I'd say
Right.
maybe a little over a third of an acre.
Yeah.
And so, but it's right along our southeast edge of the property, and beyond it is a watershed, and then eventually, like 40-50 meters away, it leads to the Little Campbell River. And so we wanted, our vision for the space is to start planting those native species like cedars and ferns and Douglas firs and all these things to kind of bring the forest up onto our grounds. And then we'd have little sitting areas and kind of a bark mulch pathway throughout. And then you'd see these driftwood monuments that acknowledge the people laid to rest in there. So I guess, speaking about a hybrid cemetery, our journey has really illuminated the significance of memorialization. And that's kind of the vein that we've been on for about the last 2 years, is studying what the needs of a grieving family are. And it's amazing. There's a company out of South Germany called Vivorum, and they have spent the last 2 decades studying the grief journey of families who they basically start the journey at the point where you get like a terminal diagnosis, and then that can go up to the point of death, and then from the point of death they have concluded it's, for the average person, it's about a 5-year process to go through those stages of grief and to a point where you're ready to kind of have a healthier, happy life, ideally. And the research that they've done, they talk to universities, they talk to psychologists, they talk to cemetery and funeral people, they talk to politicians, they talk to a lot of the cemeteries are municipal operated, so like Parks Department, local government in Europe. And the age-old conflict between cemetery operators and their clients is people, the reason that they bring these plants or adornments or candles or all these things is their need to express love, but they can't interact with their loved one because they're underground. And so the next best thing they can interact with is the monument or the headstone, the plaque, the focal point that communicates their loved one here. And so the classic battle has been like the guy who has to cut the grass, and he's just like kicking stuff out of his way all the time. He's like, what is all this junk? And yet they're expressions of love from people who are hurting. And so Vivorum has done a really good job of kind of summarizing that conflict. And then they've created in South Germany, which I've gone to visit, a 2-acre prototype. It's called the Cemetery for the Future. And it's all about interment space and memorialization that allows the family to interact with the resting space, but it doesn't jam the guy on the mower. And so it kind of creates a harmonious cemetery existence. And we're working on a project here where we're going to build out what we're calling the Garden of Artful Remembrance, which is our vision for it will be it'll be as much of a sculpture gallery as it is an interment space, but it'll just be so personal, and we're hoping it'll be very meaningful, and that it'll bring a lot of people comfort, just whether you have a resting, like a loved one here or not. Our focus is that we want this property to be a space for healing and comfort.
Awesome. That just sounds wonderful. Yeah. So it is so much, and for me personally, about hands-on. It is about that, be able to go to a place, a space, something that brings you comfort with that person. I understand about the people wanting a marker in their green burial space. I've always said if I managed to get my own green burial cemetery going, for conservation cemetery, that I would want to mark the places with native stones or even with wooden markers that would decompose and could be replaced. So I'm personally kind of rabid about marking graves. So I understand both sides of it, the conservation and the allowing the place to become forest and natural. And it's a tough one. I love the idea about the memorial, the artful remembering. That's wonderful. Yeah.
I'll send you a couple photos after this about just kind of capturing it a little better. But it's funny how many interpretations of green there are. Like we say now that the 50 shades of green, because you just wouldn't believe. I guess when you deal with the public, you just get such a range of people's opinions and values. And so in the beginning, we were, can I say hard asses? Sorry, you're hard asses on the rules. But then we were it just turned out we were like cremation shaming people.
Yes.
We were like, man, you know what? Like, I just don't feel like these presentations are going as well as they should. And it was because, okay, we might be helping somebody change their mind for what they want for themselves, but they might have cremated 3 other relatives already, and now I just made them feel like dirt for the last hour. And so we've really changed our attitude to, like, I can't help it that the cemetery market in Metro Vancouver, an average burial plot is $20,000 to $80,000. I can't help it if a family doesn't have that kind of coin lying around and they can afford a $2,000 cremation. So what we can do is help them to memorialize a loved one in a way that's more eco-friendly and is still aligned with their values. And so since we've kind of taken to just working with each family on where are they coming from, what is important to them, and who is this person that we're trying to honor, then the sky is the limit. And I think that's what's made this place pretty special, is that families just appreciate that we're coming with constructive questions rather than holding up a rule book and saying, like, this is what you get.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And all of my family has been cremated. And David and I make memorial jewelry with cremated ashes, right? Wooden rings with inlaid.
I didn't realize you did the inlay with it. I knew about your rings, but I didn't realize you put cremated remains in there.
And one of the reasons for doing this initially was because I have all my family's ashes, and I love them. I love having something tangible. I think that's, I'm not anti-cremation at all. I might choose a natural burial for myself, but I would take a little bit of my people's cremated remains with me. So I love the idea of not shaming people who are choosing cremation. And although I'm a natural and burial advocate, I'm like you. I honor everybody's, not everybody wants a green burial, a natural burial. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you of finding ways to include everyone in that grieving process. One of the things that I love is the stone barrows in the UK. Have you seen those? Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, they're phenomenal.
I just love those. I want to see one of those in BC. But that's another way of honoring, and remembering people with ashes, cremated remains. It's just a beautiful. You're old one, aren't you?
I would love one. Yeah, I'm actually, like, my team. I guess they give me a long leash because the other day I mentioned, like, I wonder if there's a way to get catacombs under our roads, and they didn't even laugh me out of the room. So we have most of our property. So we're pretty small. We're 8.5 acres, which for Metro Vancouver, like, most of the cemeteries are like 30 to 60 acres. But this is what we can afford, and we are, for the most part, we're about 3/4 kind of planned out. We have about 8 faith communities who have set up those memorial gardens I was describing, which is, it's really cool that you have traditional Orthodox Christians. We have about 5 or 6 different churches in that garden in the Greater Vancouver Orthodox Cemetery, and then across the road we have these Muslim associations, and it's anywhere you look, you turn on the television and you see people throwing rocks and breaking windows and screaming and yelling at each other, and yet there is so much humanity that connects us. Like, we have so much more in common than you'll ever see on television. And so to see, like, these faith communities where their spirituality is very strong, and that, like, we see firsthand how their faith helps their families navigate the grieving process, the funeral process, that does bring quite a bit of comfort. But also to just see no matter who you are or what you believe, if you've lost your mother, you're sad, you're crying. And to just see these glimpses of how we are truly built the same, and then we're just kind of, you can make whatever decisions or believe whatever you want in life, but it's really encouraging for us. And so I just have about maybe 0.7, maybe 3/4 of an acre left of totally unspoken for ground. And we've had people come around like, oh, what are you doing with this? Can we put our church here? And I'm like, I'm so sorry, but That is the only place on the property that I'll ever be able to get underground deep. And I need like tunnels out here or something, because there's just so much more that we want to do with this place.
Great, great. So, what else? Oh, I was just, you could say you have 8 acres. We have 48 acres up here.
Yeah,
Come on up. and,
yeah,
and
man, it's beautiful.
build the stone barrel. Yeah.
That are you referring to, like, have you seen the modern stone burrow that family?
That's what I'm talking. That's
Yeah,
what I'm talking about.
They spent like 5 years stacking stone. This
Yeah.
like, oh, so dedicated, but holy cow, is that thing?
And they're beautiful, and they're proliferating. They're doing, they keep building them, and they keep filling up. The first one was all Cannings in 2014. They started building it, and within a couple of years, their 1,000 niches were full, spoken for. And so they keep building these, and people are. It's just haven't been to one, but I feel like I have. I think they're just beautiful spaces.
Yeah. I was explaining.
Only natural.
I was talking about them this week actually to a woman outside, just explaining burrows, because she was talking about all the different types of interment space, and then she's like, "Yeah, it's just too bad that it's like a niche wall or the ground are our only options." And she's like, "I wish there was more." I was like, "Well, go to the UK. Like, you do like some old Roman style stuff out there, and then start with the burrows." But yeah, they're very cool.
So, as far as the sort of the topic of our conversation with the group tonight is the hybrid natural burial in conventional cemeteries. What really interests me is that your space is quite small, and so I'm thinking it's fairly doable for most municipal cemeteries, though you're not a municipal cemetery, but I have a feeling that lots of municipal cemeteries are thinking, well, we need so much space. And I don't think a lot of space is necessary to start to have a small green burial section. Also, one of my questions for you, Trevor, was with the grave liners. Now, most of our municipal cemeteries do require grave liners. My understanding is that the grave liner is like a butter dish where it goes over, but does it have a base as well? I don't know.
Yeah, many shapes and sizes. So for a time they were using that's the fiberglass one that would just it's like a long bell that sits over top of the casket. They found that those, when you dig the plot beside, they would blow out, so they're not that structurally sound. And so then they came up with then they had a model where the casket on the lowering device would actually be on a polymer tray, and then they'd put that bell on top that would clip into the tray, and that added quite a lot of structural support. And that's still in practice today at some places. And then otherwise, the tried, tested, and true model is drop a concrete box in there and then put the deceased in that one. But like it's in our case. So the biggest issue, one of the issues that cemeteries face, especially in the Lower Mainland, is the water table. So there's nothing romantic about opening up a grave and 3 feet down it's full of water and you're supposed to commit grandma to the pond. So in our development, we put in like a pretty sophisticated surface water collection system. So when you visit, like even our parking lot is sloped so that we capture all of the water. The grass gets what it needs, runs off to the road, it's collected, and then it runs through like a 6 by 14 meter crushed rock filtration system and returns to the watershed. So we've eliminated our water table in 95% of the cemetery. So we can dig down to like 9 feet 3 days before a funeral, and we still don't have. We might get a little bit of surface water coming in that's easy to remove, but we don't have groundwater coming up. So that's how we can do natural burials and still keep it romantic, not pumping it and stuff before a.
One of my questions with the butter dishing idea, where the base is open, it seems to me like that would be a possibility for moving a little closer to a green burial if you can put the body in contact with the earth, and if the grave liner is required in the cemetery, then the butter dish idea go over the body and the body's still in contact with the ground, but you're saying that's not.
We'll go a step further, and instead of butter dish, instead of using one of those fiberglass things, just make something out of cedar. Make a cedar triangle, like a little tent shaped thing, simple insert that can fit over the remains. And then if it was that type of shape, it's not displacing that kind of air, where if you dig next to it, there's all this pressure from down to go outwards.
Right.
So it's something really simple that only needs to be 18 or 20 inches tall. And then if you're a big guy, just build it one board higher. But then that pressure would just be naturally in. It would just eventually set in on itself. But
that's great.
The Mennonites out in Abbotsford, for ages, they've been building grave boxes out of like just heavy duty cedar boards, cedar lumber. And then it's eco-friendly by default. You still have the structural support for a burial if that's a concern, because not all soil is created equal either, right? Like if you've got a bunch of sandy, stony stuff, that vault might just as well be used for shoring so that the burial could take place. But so you kind of got to base what your approach on the conditions. But like, I mean, less can be more. It's funny when you look back, just look at what they were doing 100 years ago. How did they figure this out? Before all of this like laboratory made polymers and plastics and stuff. So yeah, it was a simpler time.
Yes, let's move back to that. We kind of have to anyway.
Yeah.
I think we have voice.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we should probably wrap up. Thank you.
It's great to see you again.
Anything else you wanted to add, or is there anything else I want to ask? Probably a million questions. Again, I absolutely love what you're doing down there. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, cool. Well, thanks so much.
Being a bright, shining light in the industry.
I just I believe in not taking life too seriously, and I mean that like the best part about my work is hearing the stories. Like there are so many cool people out there. Some of the lives lived are just amazing, and being a part of helping people of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds to honor a life lived is just like, it is pretty cool. So I hope that you get your cemetery up there and you get a taste.
Thank you. Right on. Thank you, Trevor.
Sweet. Okay, thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Are we back? Great. Thanks for your patience with my not techno wizardry. So yeah, Trevor certainly, we certainly got around in the conversation. There was lots to talk about, and he's very interesting. So I haven't looked at the messages or the questions in the chat, but I think Emily has been keeping an eye out, and pretty much
we've had
Go ahead.
we've few about the project that he mentioned, and I missed the name of the company. I think it was Vivorum or something like that, but I tried a few different Googles and didn't pull it up, but I did link, and it looks like Chandra as well shared a project from Strasser, which is also in Germany. So I think that's the project who's speaking to about sacred spaces.
Thank you. He's away this week, and we didn't reconnect. He was going to send me some photographs, and I also did the same thing, Googled to try and find, but thank you, that looks great.
Yeah. And we did have somebody who was asking for just a bit more of a general description of what natural burial is versus, I'm not unnatural burial, but alternative that people are choosing.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want, I'm happy to field a couple of questions if that works.
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you, Emily. And you could introduce yourself a little better than I did to me.
Yeah, I think I was on this, I think at least a couple of other times, so I might look familiar to some people on here, but I'm a funeral director. I've been working in the industry since 2016. I was on the coast for most of that, and now I'm in Kamloops in the interior. So I had many burials at Heritage Gardens, and it's as beautiful as it sounds, and they are genuine. It's and they also are the service commitment and the commitment to the experience of what the family is doing there it really shines when you're there. it's sacred work for them. So it's really, I'm always happy to see him. He's the real deal. And I do have one of their honeys in my cupboard downstairs. So so the shades of green that he was talking about, for me, the way I typically explain it is that you have in a conventional cemetery where you go and it looks like a lawn. Some of them are even just called lawn. Forest Lawn is a very famous cemetery in LA. There's also a Forest Lawn in Burnaby. Part of the way that they maintain that landscaping function is by using materials in the burials that help keep the land flat. So in a conventional cemetery, that what you'll see now is kind of a multi-layered burial process. So on the outer part touching the soil, you'll have a concrete liner. And then within the liner, you'll have some type of vault, usually made by a synthetic material or a bronze even, or vinyls. They're pretty big things, these vaults. And then within that, you'll have a metal or treated wood casket. And then within that casket, you'll have a person who may have been embalmed, which embalming is the chemical preservation of human remains. So there's kind of a number of layers. And if you go from that all the way to this side of the most green, what you're looking at is just basically minimizing the amount of material between that person's body and the parts of the soil that take us back to the land. So in the greenest form of green burial, you'll have maybe about 3.5 foot depth. So it's a shallower grave. A non-embalmed body dressed in only natural fibers that is then shrouded in a natural fiber shroud. So a linen or a cotton, and then placed directly in the soil and buried at that 3.5 foot. And that depth is what allows a bit more of an oxygen exchange to take place, but it's also deep enough that you don't get animals. So that's kind of the spectrum. And the reason that they don't do memorials or not memorials, but headstones is the way I'm thinking of it, is because like Trevor said, they're trying to let them become trees again. And they're not going to be doing the landscaping around the upright headstones that you see in a traditional cemetery because it's not practical over time. So if you go to a matured green burial cemetery like the one that they have in Saanich on Vancouver Island at Royal Oak Burial Park, they've done hundreds of burials in that section in the last 12 years. And when you look at it, it looks like a forest with a trail through it. And that's because it's been allowed to go back. If you go to Denman Island and they've got a natural burial section there, I think they're probably closer to maybe 30 burials there at most, I would say. But it's more of a grassy type of land. So you get these kind of little yellow flowers where the soil composition has changed, but it's not a forest because that's not the way it grows there. But you get this kind of scrubby grass. So they just let it go back. And then the communal memorials where they have all the names sort of etched in the stone, that just saves people kind of going back over that land, and it sort of preserves it, kind of the don't walk on the grass here, we're letting it heal. So that's what he's talking about. So the very, very greenest thing that you can do is to plant your body in a conservation space. So that's what Denman Island has done. They're actually part of a natural conservancy. So they have committed, in addition to having this natural burial ability, they actually received that 2 acres that they're on was essentially donated to them from this convent. And they had to agree to the way that they would be restoring and maintaining the land to allow it to be healed through the burials that are happening there. So it's a really incredible option that maintains green space in kind of a radical way, if you ask me. And I think it has enormous potential to not just create meaning with loss, but also to reconnect us to land in a way that we have come away from. And I think that intuitively people do feel drawn to that sense of connection to the land. There's something really primal about attending burials, even when we're out of practice. So I hope that helps a bit, that definition for what Trevor was talking about. And I can see another on, yes, Salt Spring does use stone markers, and they're just like, I also love them. They're everyone, you get some really interesting folks who get into this, but Kathy's just like salt of the earth people, her and Gavin. They have a quarry on the property. So they use stone out of the quarry from the property, and they tell families when they choose that stone and they blast it, they have those markers, they're not going to be maintaining them. So in the future, probably where they live, it's so lush, definitely within the living lifetimes of the close relatives, it will be harder to find those stones. And they make that a part of that release process. I think what Trevor was talking about reinitiating with our grief processes through the things that we do, it's a new way of approaching that idea. I sat with a family today, I funeral direct in town now twice a week, and they were sort of talking about the idea of, well, like they want to do scattering. And I think BC has to be probably the scattering capital of the world. There's countries where scattering's not even allowed. It's against the law. But here it's like you're pretty much free rein to scatter anywhere where you've got permission to do it or where it's public property. And I think that's because we live in a fabulously beautiful place with a very high cremation rate. Burial is kind of expensive. And people live all over the place. And so when I'm sitting with a family and they've got 3 children who live in different parts of the country, and they go, well, let's just split dad up in 4 and then we'll each scatter in our area. But they still came back and said, well, Mom, what if you just get a plaque at the cemetery so that you can just go and see his name? And I was thinking about that when Trevor was talking, that experience of running your fingers over somebody's name. And there's these really subtle interactions that we have that are really meaningful. And he was joking a bit about grave goods, grave goodies. I've heard some people derogatorily say grave junk, but the fake flowers and the stuff that gets left at gravesides, yeah, it's all a part of that yearning for connection. So I am also a fan of markers, and I'm a fan of headstones, and I just love art. And I think that you can just see some of the most amazing expressions of such profound feeling in memorials. So and also some levity. Like we had the local hockey team here is the Blazers. And when someone scores, they play Taking Care of Business. And a very, very long time fan recently died, and he got Taking Care of Business put on his epitaph. So I think people just, they can do kind of what is meaningful to them. Yeah, but I'm happy to answer questions. I know we're wanting to kind of talk around hybrid cemeteries, but also I know that sometimes there's just general questions come into groups this way. So if anybody has anything in particular they'd like to field, I can also do a fabulous ramble. I'll talk forever. I'm like, I love green burial, and it's not actually accessible in my community where I am currently. There's not an obvious way to do it. There's a lot of small cemeteries around town that are not really necessarily being managed actively. And so I'm kind of seeing about whether or not we can leverage that to be available, and we're poking the city to try and create a hybrid section in the city cemetery here. But as a couple people mentioned, that can take years sometimes. Suzanne, I have asked you to unmute, so if you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Nicola, for that wonderful interview. I thought that there was such valuable information for me. I live on Thetis Island. We have a conventional cemetery on Thetis, but we have a small portion of land that we're trying to, or hoping to develop as a green or natural burial area. I wanted to get a fact straight. Did I hear Trevor say that they had 123 graves on a third of an acre?
They
Is
have
that what he-
space, they have space for,
They have
Yeah.
space for on a third of an acre.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Emily, this is a very specific question. I know most standard graves are 4 by 8 feet. What kind of space are you finding is being left between the graves for that issue of possible cave-ins that sort of came up in that conversation and that kind of issue?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the land type, I think. You get really different type of cave-in. I remember when I visited Denman Island, they had to reinforce, they were really trying to like innovate how they were going to get the sides of this grave to stay in place because it was caving in so dramatically. It became just kind of this huge hole. So depending on the type of tools and equipment that you have, if you are really well equipped to dig, and I'm not a cemetery person, so I can only speak to, I know that there are sort of these liners that you can lower in with a like a backhoe that you can lower in, and that they will hold the space, and then you put the body in, and then when you lift that out, it caves in. But a small cemetery that's being run on a volunteer basis likely won't have access to those kinds of resources. So you might end up having to innovate or allow more space. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are green burial cemeteries that will offer double depth spaces. So they are digging down to kind of the conventional depth of 6 or 6.5 feet, and then doing a shallower depth grave on top of that. So when he says 123 spaces, they may depth in that. So that is another way of economizing, is kind of vertically. So it is, things change slower at a deeper depth. And again,
Right.
it really depends on your climate, how that will happen. But a soil scientist will be able to give you some information. And the municipal cemetery, just talking to the grounds crew or the people who are there typically doing the digging, they're really knowledgeable, and it's usually pretty kind of like practical, like I've been digging graves for 20 years and this is what I've seen kind of knowledge. So they're really great resource. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Trevor is too.
Yeah. Thank you. That gives me some good pointers. Thank you.
Mhm.
so Kara, thanks, Suzanne. Kara is asking, how do we advocate for green burial in our municipalities? And
Yeah.
My suggestion is call and talk to them, call and ask, call and find out who your cemetery people are in your town or city. Someone is in charge of the cemeteries and city hall, and make a phone
Yeah,
call.
we've been since I moved here, there was already a group that was advocating for green burial and trying to come up with ideas on what to bring to the city. I think there is strength in numbers, because, for example, I've got all this knowledge about funeral stuff. But a couple of the women who are in this green burial working group that was already going, they have a much better understanding of how city council works and how municipal bylaws change. So I've got all my lofty ideas, and then they go, well, if we present it this way, it's more likely that council will actually vote rather than, or like if you propose it, they just know the politics of it better than I do because it's a municipal operation. So I would say if you know people who have worked in the city or who have been around it, it actually, in our area and probably a lot of them, it falls under facilities and parks. So you get people who really don't work in cemeteries at all, who it's just this thing that's on the corner of their desk. And so at least what we've found, and we've just been in conversation with them, really open-minded, is just saying, well, you know, one option is a whole section, but with hybrid burial, really it's just a matter of amending the bylaws to include some exceptions for the use of those concrete liners and heavy duty caskets. And you say, well, would you be open to designating a section where maybe you could have these types of burials side by side, and you know, this is how you build the grave up so that when it caves in, it's, you know, pretty flat. And then you just kind of have to pitch it and you go, well, you know, it's a bit, you're front loading your maintenance because you have to do a little bit more landscaping early on, but then you leave it alone for eternity. And so that's, to me, that's a pretty good sell. But yeah, I would say connecting with people who have the different skills that are required to do something like this, which is, it's a multifaceted kind of project.
Here in
But
Williams Lake, I've been a thorn in the side to Cindy Walters, who's with us tonight. Thanks for coming, Cindy. Well, you know, I've sent an email about every 6 months or every 8 months to see how things are going, and she keeps letting me know how the city is faring, what they're doing as far as maybe putting some money into the budget. So because we need a new cemetery. And in any case, she's been wonderful, and you will find people that you can talk to in the city, as Emily's saying, in your municipality, who will be helpful and do as much as they can to kind of move it forward. So.
and I do think it's just kind of an interesting note, according to the municipal, basically the rules for municipalities when they were very first established, the very first obligation of a new municipality is to have established their cemetery. Because originally when we were establishing municipalities, we recognized the need to have somewhere to put our dead. And I think probably due to privatization and just changing cultures and shifts away from religion, that duty kind of has fallen into a bit of a gap, where corporate cemeteries haven't really done a great job of filling it, and municipalities have kind of left it to the church, and then the church, you know. So we're in this kind of weird space where there is absolutely opportunity there for people to do something kind of creative. And I think municipalities can get excited about it because it's ultimately a pretty good news story, and it's a caretaking thing. For example, those stone gardens for pregnancy and infant loss. Like, talk about something that's happening in these mysterious margins. If you as a municipality can take an established step towards saying, like, this is one of the ways that we care for these vulnerable bereaved people, then you're bringing people in. It's so much more like a park than like a museum. So there's so much potential. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of questions here too. Thanks, Emily. Margaret Wendy Simpson says, I've had people tell me green burial may be discontinued for some reasons. Is this really happening? No, it's not happening. I don't think, not that I know of anywhere. Margaret,
there might be maybe in a particular cemetery or something, if they're, I think it's like anything, you need the advocates to get it going and then to build the momentum. So
whereabouts are you, Wendy? What community? Sorry, you're muted.
I'm in Vancouver, and what it is my mother lives on the island and she wants a green burial, and so that's why I'm learning about it. But there was people telling me that they'd heard that there were going to be, you know, discussions about rules around them and this sort of thing. They couldn't really give me any information. They'd heard these things, so I wondered if any of you people who are sort of in the biz had heard something.
So
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's not a trend, but it's certainly with specific and particularly smaller community cemeteries, they will sometimes, you know, is discussion and they can decide whether they want to go that route if they have the space. So it could be very specific to the cemetery that your mom's connected to.
Thank you.
Someone, Margaret was saying, is it Margaret? You have the land. I have the property and want to put a conservation covenant on it. Where are you? Margaret, are you still with us here? I don't see, there's Margaret.
Sorry, I didn't know how to unmute.
That's okay.
Yes, I'm in the Comox Valley and I have 2.5 acres and I want to put a conservation covenant on it and turn it into a, so it can become a green burial cemetery.
And you're in the Comox Valley, did you say?
I am right between Courtney and Comox.
So there are folks down there, I think, working on natural and green burial.
Well, we have Denman Island and we have South Surrey. And I see that there's Krista, who's here in Courtney or in Comox, and somebody else, Jillian, I think.
Yeah.
And
so
Krista is a brilliant funeral director, so that's she's a great resource to have. If I could, Nicola,
please.
when people so when I was on the board for the Green Burial Society for about 3 years, like 2019 to 2022-ish. And one of the main questions we would get from people is I've got a bit of property and I'm curious about whether I can turn it into a cemetery. So I can speak to the cemetery part, not as much to the covenant part. I don't really know how those work. And so I'll put that to the side. But for a cemetery, the Consumer Protection British Columbia are the ones who actually do the licensing and the regulating. So it's consumerprotectionbc.ca, I think. And if you go to their website, they actually have a very good, essentially like a list of things that need to be done. I would say the initial barrier, the initial hurdle that's kind of the most challenging for people is you have to do a geological assessment to make sure that the soil is suitable for burial. So you need to find a soil scientist who can do that assessment. And then you would essentially engage the services of them and they would do it. And as you go down that list, you have to get a certificate of public interest. So that basically means that you talk to the neighbors and the neighbors are okay with having a cemetery down the road. And then there's registering the business, setting up a care fund, and basically building out the operations itself. But the very first step is making sure that the soil is suitable for burial.
Emily, I'm going to interrupt for a sec. When we
Yeah.
were checking on our own property here, the very first step was checking with our district municipality to see if we were zoned cemetery. Because if you're not,
Right.
you know, and we're rural, obviously, but that was what we had to find out first, and that's what Consumer Protection said, make sure that. So we're zoned cemetery out here. Woo!
Yeah, so if you're changing the zoning, basically you're creating a place of interment on the land. And so for example, with Heritage Gardens, I think it took them 8 years because they actually converted ALR, which is a pretty incredible thing because it's very challenging to convert ALR, but they had the resources to do that. I think most of us would have a hard time pushing for 8 years to get that to happen. So yeah, the type of land that you're currently on will make a difference. I think Kathy at Salt Spring Island, I think that theirs was mixed use residential commercial, and they were able to convert it to interment. So it does, that will definitely make a difference. So my advice to you would be to go on consumerprotectionbc.ca and look at that checklist that they've got, and kind of just start there and then start asking the questions about your municipality. Yeah, I think that was the Slocan burial group. I don't know if there's anybody here from that group. They managed to create a grassroots cemetery. It's Slocan Lake, right? It's Green Lake or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that they said when they were trying to find the land to do it. They put an ad in the paper that said, "Do you want to be buried in your backyard? Get a hold of us." And because the only way to do that in BC is to make your backyard a cemetery. So they did that to try and get interest from people who maybe had property that they were open to doing that with. So Margaret, that's really exciting, and I hope that
yeah.
I hope the way opens before you, because
Yes.
it
Or-
can.
or-
I think Salt Spring Island was less than 2 years, I think, that they got that from idea to running. So, it is doable.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a hard, long slog. It can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see Krista answering questions in the chat, which is awesome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the municipality bylaws, it's actually kind of interesting if you're like me and sometimes you just poke around at municipal cemetery bylaws, you'll start to see the same language used over and over and over. So technically, no, they're not supposed to be cookie cutter, but you can kind of tell that I think about 15 or 20 years ago, they all just copied and pasted the same bylaws across the board. Which again is kind of inspiring to me, because if we can make a good copy and paste like that one that they have at Penticton, if you can just copy and paste that green burial section into your existing bylaws, like I don't see why we can't make that a change that's totally feasible. So it becomes a public pressure thing, I think, that's required. Yeah, and we had a question about when there's a death, does the body go to the funeral home before the green burial? And Krista answered, in most cases, yes, but not always, which is very accurate. What it comes down to is the circumstances of the death, obviously. If someone dies unexpectedly, usually they will be in the care of a funeral home or the coroner or the hospital while someone takes a look to make sure that all of their paperwork is done, basically. So with an unexpected death, there's usually a delay. So you would typically have the services of a funeral home or a hospital morgue. But if you're having an unexpected, so unanticipated passing, and you're able to put pieces in place ahead of time and you really know what's happening. And like, for example, with MAID, with a medically assisted death, you can do a ton of planning when you can pretty much know down to the minute when someone's going to be passing away. A lot of people will say, I want to keep my body at home. I don't want to go to the funeral home. I don't want to go to a morgue. And if you are sort of strategic and you have cooperation from a funeral home or a cemetery, you can, if you pass away at home, you can have 2 or 3 days and then go directly to the cemetery. It's doable. I've done it. It just takes organization, and it takes a really high level of communication as a family. Because getting everybody on board for something that's not the predictable done thing, it takes a lot of communication, and you're not always going to get everybody on board, but you kind of need enough to help the dying person feel supported, and then help the closest people feel supported. But I have seen it done, and I think it's beautiful, and it is my wish for myself as somebody who does this as their work. So I think, yeah, funeral homes are great too. I just, if I don't have to go to one, I'd rather.
Thank you, Emily. That's awesome. Thank you so much. We're at 8:24. So I'm wondering if there are any burning questions or cool questions from anyone. Put your hand up if you're, or a comment, and we're close to wrapping it up. Thank you all for being here. You can speak. You don't have to write in the chat. You're allowed to open your mic and say hello.
Yeah, I think if anybody is interested, I don't know, I think Lissa is still in here. So we've got a local reporter in Kamloops who's going to be releasing an article about green burial soon. I don't know. They're fact checking right now. I don't know how that works, but I'll share it around in our
Yeah, we're hoping next Tuesday. It could be the Tuesday after that, but we're doing edits and fact checks literally right now. So
Yeah. So I'm hoping we can share this because Liz is reporting from Kamloops. They do a fabulous job of including Indigenous perspectives in their work. And so I think if we can, it's a matter of cultivating a bit of a movement, and Nicola is an incredible leader in that sense, of bringing gatherings like this together. So yeah, when we have the article, we can share it and then hopefully continue to have momentum in people coming together like this.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, this has been recorded and it will be shared with everyone who registered. And it was upwards of 65, 70 people, I think. So there is a good whack of people in the province who are really interested in this. So let's keep going. And we'll do this again in 2 months. And I was saying to Emily, it might be really interesting to talk about inactive cemeteries. Emily's put together a really nice, easily accessible list of the inactive cemeteries, and that's available on the Consumer Protection website. And so anyway, there's lots to look at as far as the inactive cemeteries in the province. They are legion, and they are also ripe for green burial, for natural burial. Some of them, many of them, they're sitting inactive. They're not full cemeteries, or maybe they are. So, there's lots of possibility there.
I added my email to the chat in case anybody wants to email me.
Thank you.
I'm going to be on the island doing some kind of quirky workshops this summer. So if anyone wants information about that, in July, you can shoot me a message. It'll be great. But it's awesome to see everybody. Thank you all for
Yes.
being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for putting this on. Yeah,
Our pleasure.
yeah,
Our pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for
yeah,
coming.
thank you.
All right. Good night. Happy spring.
Oh,
Yeah,
same
good
to
luck.
you.
Thank you very much. It was so wonderful to hear this. Yeah,
Oh, good. Thank you. Glad
take
you
care.
enjoyed
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
it. You too, Wendy. So Zoom AI does, I'll just turn off the recording here.